My name is Paudel, and I'm going to talk about empowering potential, unleashing the strength within learning differences. At this point, I would like to say only a few words about myself, as my biography has a decisive influence on the conceptualization of this presentation and also how I conduct my research projects in the context of dyslexia. So I have been a dyslexia therapist for over 20 years, and I also worked as a primary school teacher in this context. That means I was a primary school teacher and I was responsible for the pedagogical diagnosis of pupils who have learning differences and also to help to understand what are their needs, but also to support them. In 2017 until 2020, I held a pre-doc position at the University of Vienna, where I also played a key role in the development and design of the so-called subject of inclusive education. And as a part of my dissertation project, I reconstructed the framework of action of teachers in inclusive classes regarding reading and writing differences. Since 2020, I am a professor at the University College of Teacher Education in Vienna, so I'm from Austria, and my focus in research, education, and training is close related to dyslexia, literacy, but also language education. And since 2019, I'm a board member of the Austrian Federal Dyslexia Association, but also a board member of the European Dyslexia Association, which sees itself as an association to connect all associations in Europe. So, as the title mentioned, I will focus in this presentation on the individual strengths and talents of pupils with reading and writing difficulties and how these can come to light. In doing so, I refer to international, but also to my own studies that I have conducted, also in the context of how teachers, but also dyslexia therapists see students. And in line with the title of the event, I would set the focus on the beliefs, but not only on the beliefs, but also I move on to the understanding and finally also some parts of the support. So it's like general to see what kind of influence do the beliefs have in the understanding, but also in the support. And from the perspective of the dyslexia therapist in Austria, the perspective is on empowering potential. So there are many studies on teachers' beliefs that focus on various dimensions of diversity, but also inclusive education. So there are studies on how the beliefs on gender can make an influence of how to understand pupils, but also how to support them. But there is also different studies on how language can be an influence in the belief, but also in the support of pupils. And the first part, which is mentioned here, is the evaluation of the awarding of special education needs in Austria. This is mentioned because at the very first part of this conference, it was talked about dyslexia-friendly schools. In Austria, it is not like that. So it's not as friendly as it should be. And when we have a closer look on pupils who get the special education needs status, then we can say that 44% of these pupils speak, for example, another language than German. And however, these results must be interpreted against the background that the proportion of pupils at compulsory schools with a language other than German differs between the federal states. So in those states where there are pupils with other languages than German, it makes a big population of pupils who get special education needs status. Yeah, and therefore it makes a difference in which attribution teacher ascribe to pupils based on language. And it is not for nothing that the allocation of special education needs in Austria has been scientifically researched. And as a recommendation, it is recommended that schools are challenged to develop the teaching. So they see here in this construction of this special education needs status that there should be a change in the development of lessons and teaching. Another example is the study of Woodstock and Nicole, who looked at teachers' beliefs about inclusive education and their responses towards specific learning disabilities. Teachers' understanding and expectations of students are important if students are to achieve their potential. This study examined the beliefs of 182 Australian secondary school teachers about inclusive education in relation to the causal attribution towards students with specific learning difficulties. The results show that teachers who believe in inclusive education are more positive, encouraging in their feedback to the students. They are more sympathetic towards them and have higher expectation for the future than their peers. So as a conclusion, it is said that teachers need to believe in inclusive education if students are to fulfill their potential in school. Similar findings can also be found in Woodstock's study in England. In my own study on the reconstruction of the framework of action of teachers in inclusive secondary school classes, where the focus was on typical basic attitudes of the teachers tended to focus on the potential of the pupils when they adopted the typical basic attitude, focus on the pupil's perspective. Opportunities for action were then opened up that related to differentiation in lessons, the possibility of participating in remedial courses, and transparency in assessment. So when we have a closer look on this research, which was done with a method, which was the aim of the method was to generate a theory through the data material, which were interviews with different teachers. So we can see here that there is the orientation framework. So how, what kind of knowledge do teachers have when it is coming to reading and writing differences? So what are the cause attribution? But there was also something important for those teachers who were interviewed, because they say in the years of teaching, the pupils' heterogeneity has become more and more important for them. And as the method was to build up typical basic attitudes, as I mentioned before, there were some teachers who had a focus on the pupil's perspective. And when they had the focus on the pupil's perspective, the option for action was, in the lesson, I have to find a way to give all pupils the possibility to join in, or to give other working sheet, to give other things, so that they have to differentiate the lesson. But they were also saying they are trying to create a framework of conditions that the pupils have the possibility to join a remedial courses. But when we have another look at these typical basic attitudes, there were also other found. For example, there were a teacher who has only the focus on pupils with a specific status. So it was mentioned that also for those pupils, there is a differentiation, but they are only focusing on the pupils with, for example, special education needs. Yeah, and the last one was the classification of pupils. So there were teachers, they had inside the beliefs a classification system. So they say, okay, we have the dyslexic pupils, we have the pupils with other languages than German, or we have the combination of dyslexic and other languages. And when they had like this kind of typical basic attitudes, it means in the lessons that they were doing a homogenization. So every pupil get the same things and tasks to do. And they make this classification system to advise also the parents what can be the next steps. That can mean that the pupil should attend a remedial course. It can also mean that they give the advice that they should go outside the school and look for private lesson and so on. But in the lesson, there is no changes. So there is a different focus, I would say. And with these typical basic attitudes, we can see that it depends in this theory of the orientation framework that there are different options for action. And that can be also be discussed in the context of inclusion. Yeah. So, and the last study I will mention now, and that is the main focus also in the beliefs, is my study about the helpful approaches of logopedagogy in the promotion of dyslexic adolescents, which also deal with the, I call it human images of dyslexia therapists. So how do dyslexia therapists see the clients, and what kind of beliefs do they have, and what does it have as a consequence for the support? So the importance of beliefs, understanding, and support was linked as follows. So the logopedagogy, as very shortly, is derived from the logotherapy. So or the existential analysis according to Viktor Frankl. So the logopedagogy is closely related to this psychotherapeutic approach. And when we look about the beliefs, on the one side, we have the philosophical thesis from Viktor Frankl, which described his way of seeing the human beings. And on the other side, we see how the dyslexia therapists were interpreted their way of seeing the clients, because it was very open interviews, but it was asked to describe how they see the clients or the pupils. And then there was the question how it is fitting together, like the logopedagogy and the way of the seeing the pupils or the clients of the dyslexia therapist, because the Austrian Federal Dyslexia Association has a very specific method. It is called HOME. It stands for Holistic and Ontogenetics Method. So holistic means that they see the client in their whole situation. And ontogenetic mean, okay, we are looking on the development process and we look, okay, what are the next step? Where is the client standing and what are the needs and how to get further? So one of the philosophical theses of Viktor Frankl is the person is an individual. And in the context of the dyslexia therapies, it means that when the client is coming to the dyslexia therapy, the methods are adapted to the needs of the pupils and should therefore be individualized. That means that the dyslexia therapist has some methods, they have some ideas how to support the client, but at the first step, they're looking like the whole situation. They have a lot of things they're looking at, and then they decide, okay, what are we doing with which methods? And in the words of a dyslexia therapist, there is not the learning differences, because there is also not the child, but there are individual issues. And when we come to another thesis, the person is not only an individual, but also insummable. It means that a person is more than like the pieces coming together like mother, father, siblings. It is a unique person. And when we look about what the therapists say in this context, so the therapists of the Austrian Federal Dyslexia Association set themselves the highest goal to consider the clients in their unique overall situation. That means that when the clients are coming into the therapy, then it can also be that not only the reading and writing difficulties are in the foreground. Maybe it's also to work on the relationship with the parents, for example, because maybe they had a long way to get there, yeah, with learning and struggling and working in the situation. For example, when there is like a test, yeah, and the whole family was learning with the child, and it was not successful, then it makes something with the relationship. And it can also be that the first step in the therapy is to find new ways in the family to see the positive sides, for example. Another thesis of Viktor Frankl is every person is an absolute novelty. And in the interviews, the dyslexia therapist mentioned that their clients are valued for the uniqueness. It is the task of the therapist to maybe also work out and promote maybe their hidden talents and strengths. But it can happen because of the meaningful of reading and writing, that maybe the talents and strengths are not as visible as they should be. And then it can be one part in the therapy to look, okay, where are like maybe these hidden talents and strengths. In the word of Viktor Frankl, to grasp a person in her his essence, in her his suchness, in her his uniqueness and singularity, but not only in her his essence and suchness, but also in her his value, in her his will to be, and that means affirming her and him. So also when we think about, okay, when the client are coming to the therapist, the first step is to take the person as he or she is and to see the uniqueness and to say, yes, you're welcome here. That is a very important part in the therapy for the dyslexia therapists of the Austrian Federal Dyslexia Association. The person is not only unity and wholeness, but also instigate unity and wholeness. So for the dyslexia therapy, it is important to see the clients as they are, but also in the same time in the best shape. So when we have the focus only on the difficulties, then we maybe see only this. But when we have a look into the future and see them in their best shape, that makes possibilities open up, and that need to be exploited. The person is dynamic, so it's also a question of opportunity, possibilities. And sometimes in a therapy, it can be very important to make it visible, these possibilities, that they have a choice and that should be recognized. It can also be a choice, maybe also to change the school when it's not going on or not working, so that new opportunities can be opened up. So from this part, there are some theses which are closely related to the beliefs of the dyslexia therapist. And another model is the logopedagogical pillar model, which was closely related to how the dyslexia therapists were thinking of how to support the clients, because as I mentioned before, the home method is like to look on all parts and not only about the difficulties. Yeah, and when we look at this logopedagogical pillar model, then we have on the bottom the freedom of the will. So it is the freedom to respond to the condition of life, to say, okay, I'm part of the school, I'm part of a class, I have to go in somehow through the school system. And the will to meaning is the motivation motor, we can say. So the will of meaning is close related to the meaning of life. And that meaning of life has to be seen in the development process of the students. So when we connect it with Erik Erikson's stage model of psychosocial development, the major task in primary school is to see meaning in the production of work. So children come into the school and they want to do the things they are offered. So they want to write, they want to show, they have a high motivation and they see a sense in their work. Yeah. But however, if these are not valued, it can happen that the child can develop feelings of inferiority. And that can have an influence on the further life. And when we now look at the different pillars, so we have three, the first one is the ability to perform. And this is realized by creative values. That can mean that they make a product, they write something. That it can be in very different ways. Through the positive experience to create something, to perform something, the ability is rekindled over and over again. And when we think about how school is conducted, then the dyslexia therapists say, yeah, the ability to perform in school is somehow broken. Yeah, so there can be negative experiences when I try every day to read something or to bring in my competences and it is not working. So that is a negative experiences and it suffers, it can be a collapse in the pedagogical relationship. Yeah? And in the dyslexia therapy, they look at the strength of the clients to build up this pillar again and to give the motivation back to the clients. The ability to love is through experience values, which can be realized through the conscious surrender of the moment in the experience. The ability to love can be rekindled again and again. And in the dyslexia therapist, it is very important to find these experiences together when they play a game or something, and where you can have this feeling together and feel happiness, for example. But it can also be a part of the therapy when the relationship between, for example, the parents and the child, but also the relationship between the pupil and the teacher suffer because the ability to perform is not going on. Then it can also be part of the dyslexia therapy to think about it and to give advices or to find ways that the child is building up also this pillar. And the last pillar is the ability to suffer, and it is limited by adjustment values. For example, the renunciance, the endurance, and it can be realized by these values. And when pupils have dyslexia or they're trying their things and go through the system, they build up coping strategies. And here the question arises, especially in the adolescence, what kind of coping strategy do they have? Because it can have a negative consequence also for the identity development process. Because sometimes they have the feeling, because of this main part of reading and writing, which is in every subject very relevant, that they cannot go through it. And then also this ability can have an influence. Yeah. And in the dyslexia therapy, it is very important to take the person seriously, also in her and his uniqueness, but also to see what is important for the person, yeah, and how to take into account in the therapy. So this different model should give some kind of overview about the beliefs, but also what the beliefs lead to an understanding and what are the consequences also for the support. And I used this model also in the teacher training to give like an idea how to see the things in different ways. And as a conclusion, I would like to show a short video and to finish like with it. So I will now close the presentation and hope that it's working. One moment. I hope. One moment, I will close and then I will. I'm not sure if I did the. That you also hear something. So, one moment.
Everyone.
Is it working? Did you hear something?
Is different. The 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report on Inclusion and Education believes that education is strongest when it embraces diversity. Learners should not have to adapt to the system. Instead, education systems should adapt to their needs. When students do not feel welcome in school, they are less likely to learn. This is everyone's loss. But rich and poor countries too often educate some children apart. Children who have a disability, have been displaced, speak a different language, or are poor and disadvantaged. School design may favor some students over others, as do many laws and policies. Teachers are often ill-equipped to cater for students' diverse needs. Children may not recognize the way they are portrayed in textbooks. Some may not see themselves there at all. They receive the message that they do not belong. Testing sometimes follows a narrow vision of education, and consequently, some students leave education earlier than they should. These are complex problems to solve, but a belief in the right to education is a belief in inclusion. Children have different learning speeds and needs. They need curricula that are flexible, creative, and relevant. How we prepare teachers matters. They must be given the tools and training to achieve our vision for reform. The resources we know can help the marginalized, educators, support staff, and equipment should be shared so that everyone can benefit. Better data on those left behind will help us reach them. Disadvantages often accumulate. We can't address inclusion one group at a time. Redressing these disadvantages requires funds. These must be equitable and target individual-specific needs. We must work together on these tasks across government ministries, from central to local authorities, with civil society supporting governments, and schools opening doors to the community. Inclusion in education requires a change in mindset in society, so that education for all means education for everyone, without exception. Achieving this is everybody's business, including yours.
So thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm